you take back what you said about the president's involvement in a bribery scheme now that Alexander Smirnov is proven to have made it up and it was based off Russian intelligence?
Doesn't change the four fundamental facts. Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, gets paid $1 million a year. Fact number two, he's not qualified to be on the board. He said so himself in an interview, I don't know, with you or some network. Fact number three, Zolochevsky and Pizarski, the two executives at Burisma, specifically asked Hunter Biden, can you weigh in with D.C. and help us deal with the pressure we are facing from the prosecutor? Fact number four, Joe Biden, then he gets called. Hunter Biden calls his dad, according to Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's business partner. Fact number four, Joe Biden then goes to Ukraine 3 days later and conditions the release of the money, American tax money, on the firing of the prosecutor who was applying the pressure to the company that Hunter Biden sat on the board of.
You said the 1023 is the most corroborating piece of information you have.
It corroborates, but it doesn't change those fundamental facts. So now
but it's not true.
Well, so okay, so the FBI told us that this source was 14 years. This source was a paid source by the FBI. When we were trying to get the 1023, they told us, oh, this could jeopardize national security, the safety of this source. Didn't want to release it, and now they're saying, oh, he gave false information. The other thing, there's a story out today. Scott Brady, the U.S. attorney, did check the travel records of this confidential human source and found that he was at those places he said he was. So,
but your promotion of a bribery scheme was false.
Not at all. We're looking at the four facts I just gave you. Those facts are true. Absolutely true.
But
Joe Biden bragged about it.
But what Smirnov said is not true. Would you concede that?
Well, yeah, that's what the FBI is saying. I find it interesting that the confidential human source who gave false statements about President Trump, Christopher Steele, the FBI continues to pay him. The confidential human source who gives false information about Joe Biden, the FBI indicts him. I mean, go figure.
But Russia.
Chairman Jordan, what do you think of the Smirnov indictment?
Well, I mean, it is what it is. So, it doesn't change the fundamental facts. There are four fundamental facts that Hunter Biden gets put on the board of Burisma. He's not qualified to be on the board. He gets put on that board and gets paid $1 million a year. Second, as I said, he's not qualified to be on the board. He said so himself. Third, in Dubai on December 4th, 2015, the executives at Burisma, Mr. Zolochevsky, Mr. Pizarski, specifically asked Hunter Biden, can you weigh in with D.C. and help us with the pressure we are facing from the Prosecutor General in Ukraine? Hunter Biden makes a call. Devin Archer told us he made a call to his dad, to Joe Biden. And then 3 days later, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine and conditions the release of American tax money on the firing of the prosecutor, applying the pressure to the company that Hunter Biden sat on the board of. Those facts, they don't change regardless of what this confidential human source is.
You said that this informant now charged with some of the most corroborating evidence. You said that in interviews last month.
Yeah, it did corroborate what I just said there, but it didn't change the facts.
But those allegations from the FISA 1923 are now found to all be lies. So how does that impact the investigation?
I think you should ask the FBI why they were so reluctant. They told us if we don't, when we wanted to see the 1023, said this could jeopardize national security, the safety of this confidential human source. You can't know his name. They didn't want to show it to us. Then they finally did. I mean, this is a guy they paid, I think, since 2010. So 14 years they've been paying this guy. And he's a trusted source, and now we find out. Plus, I think there's sort of when Christopher Steele lied to the FBI about President Trump, he gets paid more. When Smirnov lies to the FBI about President Biden, he gets indicted. I mean, go figure. So it doesn't change the fundamental facts.
You say it doesn't change the facts. It does change the facts. Those are no longer facts. Those are not true.
The four things I just said, they're absolutely true.
But
did Hunter Biden get put on the board of Burisma? Yes. Was he paid $1 million a year? Yes. Did Joe Biden condition the release of tax money for the firing of the prosecutor who was applying the pressure? Yes. All four of those things are facts, absolutely, regardless of what the confidential human source may or may not have said.
What do you make of Smirnov?
Getting away with what I view as, this is me, not you, as an American citizen, it looks like there's a lot of coordination from the White House on running cover on Hunter Biden and Biden Incorporated and the attack, this persecution on President Trump.
Well, yeah, Nathan Wade, the guy from Fannie Willis's office, he's supposedly had contact with the White House counsel's office, with the White House, with the Justice Department, with the January 6th committee, all that going on. It looks shouldn't they be running an independent Well, you would think. You would think. Now, I'm sure he's entitled to some of that information, but we want to know how this is all played out, particularly when you think about the fact they're going after their political opponent and the history I just talked about that started clear back in 15 and 16 when they started spying on his campaign. By the way, based on a confidential human source who we now know lied to him, nothing seems to happen to Christopher Steele. I'm sure the audience remembers that name. Yep. Now we have this confidential human source who Christopher Wray told us, filled out this 1023 form the FBI did to Christopher Wray, told us that this guy, we can't give you the 1023 form. This guy has been a 14-year confidential human source. We've paid him. He's respected. We don't want to risk his safety. And now they arrest the guy, not once but twice. I don't know. Maybe the guy did lie. But it sure is quite a contrast for Christopher Steele can give false information about President Trump, and he continues to get paid. This guy, this Mr. Smirnoff, can give false information. What they've said is false information, and he gets arrested. Double standard again.
I might just be slow on the go, but I don't think I'm just going to fall for the next Russian collusion immediately. I'd probably wait for proof.
Yeah. 2016, it was Trump-Russia. Of course, Mueller told us that didn't happen. 2020, it was, the laptops of Russian information op. 51 former intel officials signed that statement. Turned out to be baloney, and now here we go again, round 3. Maybe it's a case, but sure seems strange to me.
What's going to happen with Hunter?
Well, he testifies next week in our deposition, so we'll have some questions for him. We continue to dig into our work. One thing that I would say for sure is, I say this all the time, there are 4 fundamental facts that will never change. Fact number 1, Hunter Biden gets put on the board of Burisma, gets paid $1 million a year. Fact number...
But he is an energy expert. You have to give him that. Right?
Fact number...
He has a lot of energy.
You beat me to the punch on fact number 2. Fact number 2, he's not qualified. He said so himself in an interview, I think, with ABC News. Fact number 3, Hunter Biden meeting with the CEOs of Burisma. They ask him, can you weigh in and help relieve the pressure we are under from the prosecutor in Ukraine? He calls D.C., he calls his father, according to his business partner, Devin Archer, when we deposed him. Fact number 4, 3 days after that phone call, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine, conditions the release of our tax dollars, your tax dollars, on the firing of that prosecutor. That went against, by the way. Those 4 facts are... Joe Biden bragged about the last thing. He bragged about doing that. Those 4 facts go against what the State Department said they needed to happen. They'd send a letter to the prosecutor saying, you're doing a good job. 2 months before, they said the Interagency Policy Committee says, Ukraine warrants this $1 billion. Joe Biden changed it. What caused him to change it? Could it have been the phone call from his son asking? And Joe Biden gets this guy fired who's applying the pressure to the company that Hunter Biden sits on the board of, making $1 million a year. That's not supposed to be how things operate, but those facts are fundamental. So regardless of what the Democrats say about this confidential human source, those facts don't change.
I just want to go back to the previous question and say the White House counsel is Ed Siskel. I'm not accusing him of doing anything wrong, but I do think there's a lot of wrongdoing associated with the attempt to imprison Joe Biden's general election opponent, and I think we ought to know who the man is. I think we ought to answer some questions, and I want to know why the Biden administration and the Biden White House doesn't recuse itself from questions concerning their own campaign. It seems like a very basic thing, and I think that the people of CPAC, let's start asking questions about Ed Siskel. You agree? You have all these victims. You went back through Russiagate, Russian collusion, what went on during that 2016 campaign. Mercy and I know this. We've had a lot of calls over the last several years from dear friends who are quietly bankrupted, quietly investigated, quietly having their lives destroyed, quietly having their professional lives destroyed, all because they want to wear a red hat.
Yeah.
That's the reason. I have an interesting question for you, something for you to consider. Until all those people get their legal fees back, I think of K.T. McFarland, who's on my board and spent 7 figures of her money just answering basic questions. Until all these victims, we have these J6 victims who were in the crowd, others, until they were made whole financially by our government who wronged them, and by DOJ in particular, won't the wrongdoing just keep going on and on and on? No one seems to go to jail.
Any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I'd like to welcome our first panel, Chairman Jim Jordan and Ranking Member Gerald Nadler from the Committee on the Judiciary, Chairman Mike Turner, and Ranking Member James Himes from the Committee on Intelligence. Chairman Jordan, I would welcome your opening testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Good to be with you. A year ago, 11 months ago, the Washington Post reported that the FBI misused the 702 database and surveillance program, the surveillance tool, misused it 278,000 times. 278,000 times they didn't follow the law and the rules that were already in place. The base text, the way this is going to work, is there's some reforms in the base text well, the way it's going to work is how you guys determine the way it's going to work when you pass a rule, or if you pass the rule. But the base text has some reforms that I think make sense, but I think the fundamental question still is if the FBI that wouldn't follow the procedures in place and 278,000 times didn't follow those procedures, are new requirements, whether it's in the traditional FISA or in the 702 program, going to be enough to safeguard Americans' liberties? So for me, I'm just going to cut to what I think is the most important. We were here 2 months ago. Ranking Member Nadler and I had a robust discussion with this committee. Been a couple hours here talking about the various amendments in the base bill. But the thing that I think counts the most is the warrant requirement amendment. That was in the base text of the bill that came out of our committee. Came out of our committee, by the way, 35-2. Strong bipartisan, as strong as we've probably ever had in that committee, certainly in this Congress. The warrant requirement, I think, is what's needed because when you have the history we have with this organization relative to not following the rules, we think you need a separate and equal branch of the government to look at, to approve a warrant before you can query American citizens' information. And that, to me, is the most important thing. We have exceptions built into our warrant requirement. If there's an imminent threat of data, that's an exception. If you agree to let the FBI, if you talk to them and say, yeah, you can use my phone number, our email address to search, you agree to that. Or if there's a known cyber threat, some malware you know about, that's an exception too. But if you're going to look in this, what I call the haystack of information that is collected, which has Americans' information in it, if you're going to use Jerry Nadler's phone number or his email address, then you should go to a separate and equal branch of government to get a warrant to do so. That is how our system works. We think that is the fundamental thing. And frankly, I appreciate what we've got in the bill and in the base text, and those reforms are, I think, positive. But without the warrant, I don't think we've done our job. I don't think we've protected Americans in the way that we should. So for me, that's the key element. I know Ranking Member Nadler will go through more of the legislation. I'm happy to answer questions. But that is what I think is the most important. Finally, well, let me say one other thing. I do think that the other amendments that I understand are being talked about, offered from the Intel Committee, and I appreciate the work that these guys do, but offered from the Intel Committee, those amendments actually expand FISA. And I thought what we were trying to do is reform it and protect Americans' liberty. So for me, the fundamental issue is the warrant requirement. That has to be in the legislation, or I don't think we've done our job. And with that, I would yield back to the chair.
Thank you for your.
With that, I will yield up to 3 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I support the rule, but like the gentleman, I will not support the legislation unless we get this warrant amendment, that requirement in the legislation itself. Query is a fancy name for search. And the intelligence community will tell us right now there are 200,000 queries, 200,000 searches that take place every year on U.S. persons, on American citizens. 200,000 a year. Those things are done on American citizens without a warrant, and this is the FBI, that my friend, member of the Rules Committee just talked about, who's abused the system. 278,000 times, not Mr. Roy, not Mr. Jordan giving you that number. That's the number from the Washington Post. 278,000 times. Inspector General at the Justice Department determined that the FBI did not follow the previous rules when they searched this database on U.S. persons. And now we're supposed to believe, oh, we've got new rules, stricter rules, better rules, and I'm all for those. Now they're going to follow the new rules. Didn't follow the old ones, but now they're going to follow the new. Well, why don't we go to the tried and true method? If you got the executive branch wanting to look at American citizens' information, they have to go to a separate and equal branch of the government, the judicial branch, and get a probable cause warrant. It's worked pretty darn well for 200 plus years in the greatest country ever. But somehow we can't do it here? Here's the fundamental question. 200,000 searches done. Oh, by the way, our warrant requirement has 3 exceptions.
And the first exception is if it's an emergency situation, you don't have to go to a judge to get the warrant. You do the search, you find out, and you protect America. 2 other exceptions in there as well. So here's the fundamental question. 200,000 searches done on U.S. persons a year. How many of them aren't covered by the exceptions? And guess what? Nobody seems to be able to give us an answer. That's the question we need to know, because if it's a big number, we should all be scared. If it's a small number, what's the big deal? No one will answer that question. That's what we need to know. And we need to, but the best way to safeguard the liberty of the people we get the privilege of representing is to do what's been done in this country forever. Go get a warrant. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Reserve. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Mr. Speaker.
Director, let me go back to where Mr. Bishop was. Tell me about the drone. You act like you wanted to fill us in on that. Fill us in.
So we have recovered a drone that the shooter appears to have used. It's being exploited and analyzed by the FBI lab. The drone was recovered in his vehicle. So at the time of the shooting, the drone was in his vehicle with the controller. In addition, our investigation has uncovered.
Do you know what time of day he flew it, and if he flew it on the day of the shot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So in addition, it appears that around 3:50 p.m., 4 o'clock in that window, on the day of the shooting, that the shooter was flying the drone around the area for about 11 minutes. I want to be clear, but when I say the area, not over the stage and that part of the area itself, but I would say about 200 yards, give or take, away from that. We think, but we do not know, so again, this is one of these things that's qualified because of our ongoing review, that he was live streaming, viewing the footage from that, again, about 11 minutes in around the 3:50, 4 o'clock p.m. range.
2 hours before, he's flying a drone in the vicinity of the route.
About 200 yards away, yes.
Yards. Okay, that's important information. What about the bombs that we've heard about in the shooter's car?
So again, the FBI lab is exploiting those explosive devices. Yep. We've recovered 3 devices, 2 in his vehicle and 1 back in his residence.
Are these what you would call, your experts would call sophisticated operations, or this? I don't know. That's what I've been told by people who have some understanding of this area.
Yeah, I think it's. We've seen more sophisticated and less. I would say these are relatively, again, keyword relatively crude devices themselves, but they did have the ability to be detonated remotely. And so to that point, in addition to the 2 devices that we recovered out of his vehicle, there were receivers for those 2 explosive devices with the devices, and then on the shooter himself, when he was killed by law enforcement, he had a transmitter with him. Now, I do want to add one important point here, is at the moment, it looks to us, again, ongoing review, and I can't say that too many times, at a moment, it looks like because of the on-off position on the receivers, that if he had tried to detonate those devices from the roof, it would not have worked. Okay. But that doesn't mean the explosives weren't dangerous.
And I'm sure we're going to get into all these subjects a little bit later as well. Tell us what you can about the encrypted platforms we've heard about.
So one of the things that we're drilling into hard with the shooter in an effort to try to learn more about his state of mind, his motive, his ideology, his context, everything else, is to look at all of his devices, any social media accounts he had, et cetera. And one of the things we've learned in finally getting into his phone, which was also a significant technical challenge from an encryption perspective, but in addition, once we got on the phone, it turned out he was using some encrypted messaging applications.
And again, the same question relative to the bombs: was this pretty sophisticated, or is this is the kind of the norm you see with folks like similar situation? How would you describe
on this subject? I would say this has unfortunately now become very commonplace, and it's a real challenge for not just the FBI but state and local law enforcement all over the state.
Tell me exactly the scope of does the scope of your investigation include what I call that critical 5 minutes from when the 6:09, when this is based, I think, on information you've given to Congress, 6:09 when the shooter's identified on the roof, and 6:14 when President Trump is ultimately escorted off, and all that happens, the shots that take place in between there. do you have access to the communications that were going on at the time in that critical 5 minutes?
So our investigation, when you say scope, our investigation includes that time frame, although focused again on the shooter himself.
I understand.
And his
But the
now,
shooter's
as
involved
part
in
of
that. He's obviously involved in that time frame.
Correct. And as part of that, as part of our focus, our investigation of the shooter and the attack, of course, we are interviewing law enforcement from the scene because those are some of the most significant witnesses, and we're obviously getting access to their materials and that kind of thing. And the Secret Service has been fully cooperative.
You have access to the communications that exist there.
That exact question, I don't, as I sit here at the moment, I don't know the exact answer to that question, but I know that Secret Service has been cooperative with us.
The Congress would like access to those communications as well. I mean, not just that 5 minutes, although I think that's the critical time frame. There's lots of communications we'd love to have access as well. I see my time is up, and they have called votes on the floor. I think there are about 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. In 2021, 2022, the FBI did over 3 million U.S. person queries of this giant 702 database, of this giant haystack of information. 3 million queries of United States persons. And make no mistake, query is a fancy name for search. 3 million Americans' data was searched in this database of information. And guess what? The FBI wasn't even following their own rules when they conducted those searches. That's why we need a warrant. 278,000 times, not Jim Jordan talking about it, not Ranking Member Nadler talking about it. Washington Post reported last May that 278,000 times the FBI found, the Justice Department found, that they didn't even follow their own darn rules when they searched this giant haystack, this giant database of information on Americans. And so what we're saying is, let's do something that the Constitution has had in place for a couple hundred years that has served our nation well and protected American citizens' liberties. Let's make the executive branch go to a separate and equal branch of government, the judicial branch, and get a probable cause warrant to do the search. After all, it's done pretty well for this great country, greatest country ever for a long, long time. Why wouldn't we have that here? And oh, by the way, in a bipartisan fashion, coming out of our committee, 35-2 vote, we said we will even put exceptions in there. If it's an emergency situation, the FBI doesn't have to get a warrant. They can do the search. If it's an emergency situation, they can do it. We put exceptions in there. Here's the fundamental question. I raised this the other day. Here's the fundamental question. Of that over 3 million searches in a 2-year time span, how many of those aren't covered by the exceptions we have in our warrant amendment? What's the number? And guess what? We can't get an answer. They won't tell us, which should be concern in and of itself. But if it's a big number, we should be particularly frightened. If they don't follow the exceptions and they're searching Americans, searching your name, your phone number, your email address in this giant database, that should scare us. And if it's a small number, then what's the big deal? You don't need thousands if it's a small number. But we can't get an answer to that question. So the underlying bill has got some changes and reforms that are positive, that are good. But short of having this warrant amendment added to the legislation, we shouldn't pass it. This amendment is critical, particularly when you think about the 278,000 times they abused the system, didn't follow their own rules. And now we say, oh, we got some new rules, they'll follow them now. No. The real check we have in our system is a separate and equal branch of government signing off on it. That's how we do things in America. And never forget, this is the FBI who's had some other abuses in different areas. This is why we think this warrant requirement is so darn important. And with that, I reserve the balance of our time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves the yield back.
Director, when did the FBI learn that Iran was threatening President Trump's life?
So I want to be a little bit careful here, not to talk about specific classified information, but we have been for quite some time, and I'll stick with what's in the open record. We, for some time, and I in particular for some time, have been calling out the efforts by the Iranian government to attempt to retaliate for the killing of Soleimani by going after current or former prominent U.S. officials, and we've even had an indictment against it. And I think that we need to recognize the brazenness of the Iranian regime, including right here in the United States. And I expect that we're going to see more of it, and I expect there'll be more coming on that. I'm not aware of any threat information related to protectees that wasn't, passed in a timely way, but I can't really get into specifics here.
It's the minority's time here, but I just felt that was a question the committee needed to understand, and it sounds like you've known that for a long time, and that information was conveyed to the Secret Service?
Any information related to threats against the former president, which again, as we've sort of talked about, is happens all too often, is something that we have a whole process we routinely share with the Secret Service at a number of levels in a timely way, and to my knowledge, that has consistently been followed.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized. Director, that's an important question, though, because you've talked to the counter sniper, and that, I mentioned this in our opening statement, that critical 5 minutes from 6:09 to 6:14, and what takes place there is critical, and I think that's what the gentleman was getting at, and we were hopeful that you could tell us something about your interview with the counter sniper.
Yeah, I guess I want to distinguish a couple things. There is some individual, not law enforcement, I believe, who spotted the shooter on the roof a few minutes before, but I think law enforcement spotting him with the weapon on the roof is seconds before the shot.
Okay, so that's important.
Yeah, so there's two different things going on.
I think what you're saying is it wasn't maybe that if the bad guy shoots at 6:11, then you're saying this encounter with local law enforcement that Mr. Bentz was just getting into happened just seconds before that and maybe not 2 minutes before that?
That's my understanding. That, in other words, that there's different things here. There's an individual, at least one individual I can think of, not law enforcement, member of the public, who observed him on the roof. Not clear whether or not the individual saw a weapon or not, but saw him in a way that was concerning. That is some number of, not many, but like just a handful of minutes. I think separate from that, as far as law enforcement goes, in terms of a weapon, this local officer that we just talked about observed the individual, again, literally just seconds before the shooter took his shots. Separate and apart from all of that, roughly, I think, maybe a little less than or around an hour before the shooting, there were local law enforcement officers who observed the shooter, not up on the roof, not with a weapon, but with I believe, a rangefinder, kind of like you would use if you were playing golf or something, in a way that was odd and suspicious. So that started happening with local law enforcement beforehand. But in terms of shooter, meaning with the weapon, law enforcement, my understanding is that the first time that happened was this local officer climbing up on the roof seconds before the shooting.
Again, we want that timeline. I think the committee wants that timeline and communications that were taking place in that short period of time.
Again, as I've said with everything else, I really want to be careful. I'm leaning in, trying to share as much as I can here. Facts are evolving, things may change, but we are working on a timeline, among other things.
Committee will stand in recess until after the Prime Minister's remarks conclude. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The FBI can't tell us who planted pipe bombs on January 6th. They can't tell us who leaked the Dobbs decision. They can't tell us who put cocaine at the White House. But they were able to spy on a presidential campaign, lie to a FISA court, investigate parents showing up at a school board meeting, and of course saying if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're somehow an extremist. All that because I think the FBI is driven by politics today. In this Congress, this subcommittee has been investigating the political actions of the FBI and a double standard at the Biden-Harris Justice Department. We've heard from countless witnesses. We've heard from government officials and experts. We've heard from Americans targeted by their government, not just conservatives, but also Democrats. In fact, we were in a hearing in this room over a year ago when journalist Matt Taibbi was testifying. While he was testifying, it wasn't the FBI or Justice Department, but I think it makes the point, while he was testifying, the IRS was knocking on his door. Chilling impact, knocking on his door. Turned out they actually owed him money, but they did at the very moment he was testifying to us about the censorship going on in the Biden-Harris administration. Most importantly, we've heard from whistleblowers. We have one with us today who we look forward to hearing from, Mr. Allen. As we have seen, if you're not politically correct, you're not in line with what the government thinks is the proper position, you become the target. Just as frightening if you're one of the good employees in our government who came forward to talk about the targeting, then you really become the target. If you're one of those good employees driven by your commitment to the Constitution, your conscience, and you come forward, they're coming after you. The FBI has used its security clearance adjudication process to purge its ranks of conservatives and whistleblowers, to unlawfully punish those with views contrary to the FBI leadership. Excuse me. Mr. Levitt has brought multiple whistleblower disclosures to this committee regarding the rampant politics within the FBI Security Division, which is tasked with investigating and adjudicating employees' eligibility for a security clearance. Whistleblowers described the Security Division of the FBI as, quote, a toxic work environment. Investigators were asking employees about their colleagues questions like, did they support President Trump? Are they opposed to COVID vaccinations? And we know they asked this because there's a questionnaire that they used, actual questionnaire that the FBI used to have colleagues snitch on their fellow workers. According to whistleblowers, the Security Division leadership under the command of Deputy Assistant Director Jeffrey Veltri created an environment where, quote, it was very common for investigators to ask inappropriate questions of an employee's colleagues, the content of which could never have been used to revoke a person's clearance. And by the way, what is Mr. Veltri up to now? The guy who during his time at the Security Division was described as being adamantly anti-Trump, he's leading the investigation into the second assassination attempt on President Trump in Miami. He's the special agent in charge in Miami. Whistleblowers referenced specific cases where the FBI circumvented due process and ignored key facts during clearance investigations, including investigations of Marcus Allen, who we'll hear from, and Garrett O'Boyle, both whistleblowers who came to this committee. Both of these men stood up and said, this isn't right. What the FBI is doing isn't right, and they both had their clearances suspended and then revoked. But the FBI isn't going to get away with it. On May 13th, 2024, Inspector General Horowitz released a memo finding that the Justice Department and the FBI failed to comply with clear statutory and regulatory whistleblower clearance protections. On May 31st, 2024, the FBI reinstated Mr. Allen's clearance, stating that the original security concerns had been investigated and they were mitigated. All this after 27 months where they harassed Mr. Allen. Remember, Mr. Allen came before this committee on May 18th of last year. The night before the hearing, the FBI sent this committee a letter filled with lies about the whistleblowers that were going to testify that next day. The FBI questioned Mr. Allen's allegiance to the United States, decorated Marine veteran, 20 years of having a security clearance, employee of the year at his Charlotte office. They questioned that. During the hearing, Democrats attacked Mr. Allen, first by imputing someone else's tweet to Mr. Allen, second by comparing him to individuals convicted of sharing classified information with foreign governments, ridiculous, and finally by saying he wasn't a whistleblower, he just had grievances. But that's not what the IG concluded, not at all. Mr. Allen was simply doing his job, doing it well, and for that, because he questioned the leadership at the FBI, he was harassed, lost his security clearance for 27 months, only to have it reinstated. So again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and with that, I would yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. Mr. Horowitz, you said you've not seen a pattern, but you have found evidence, or let me do it as a question. Have you found any evidence of a focus on religion and vaccination status playing a role in discussions about clearance decisions?
We certainly did, as to Mr. Allen.
Of course. I mean, that's the whole point. I thought, you know, his email questioning the leadership at the FBI, they used that. They used his vaccination status. They used his religion. I thought pretty soon they were going to accuse Marcus Allen of writing Project 2025. I thought that might happen. You didn't write Project 2025, did you, Mr. Allen? No, you had nothing to do with that. Mr. Levitt, you didn't either. Right, and I know Mr. Horowitz didn't have anything to do with that. Let's go to this questionnaire, because this questionnaire that was used by the FBI in these clearance discussions, I find very troubling. in the opening, in the sort of the preamble before they get to the questions, they say they're asking colleagues to rat on fellow colleagues. They say, you are being asked to provide information as a fact witness. Should you refuse to answer or fail to reply, action against your security clearance may be undertaken. So I find this amazing. Like, they're going to a colleague in a security clearance investigation, they're asking a colleague to talk about that individual, and if they don't, they're going to lose their security clearance. I mean, that, and then when you look at the questions, do you find that a little troubling, Mr. Horowitz?
I certainly find I'm not sure I find necessarily the questioning of individuals about allegations troubling. How you tell them about it and talk to them about it is concerning, as you indicated, and certainly the questions were highly appropriate.
Certainly coupled together. Hey, we're doing a security investigation on Mr. Allen, as an example, and if you don't answer it, your security clearance is in jeopardy. And oh, by the way, here's the question. Did Mr. Allen ever voice support for President Trump? Did Mr. Allen ever express concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination? Did Mr. Allen ever attend a gun rally? That is as troubling as it gets. And right at the top of this questionnaire, FBI Security Division, Security Integrity and Investigation Section, Clearance Investigation Unit. Mr. Levitt, have you ever seen anything like this?
Not before this last round of whistleblowers, but I do think the point I tried to make earlier is even if this questionnaire was only typed up by a couple of individuals, and to be clear, those are the same ones that were worried about the Kelly cart. So they're the same ones that were worried that they're right. Supervisors. But even in cases where this questionnaire wasn't used, we've heard from a number of whistleblowers that these types of things were asked about, and of course we know they factored into the decisions. And so I think it's not just about the questionnaire, right? I hope that the Inspector General's office will look at how all of these issues were focused on by leadership.
That's the element of fear Mr. Allen just talked about in his last response to Mr. Bishop. The fear, that environment of fear. And this is it in practice, right here. That is what is scary. So if that's not weaponization of government, earlier Ms. Crockett asked about would the weaponization of government include certain things. It would certainly include this in the environment described by Mr. Allen, and it would certainly include the 27 months that he had to live through and the 24 months now Garrett O'Boyle has had to live through. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Oh, Mr. Kirshner, would the weaponization of government include lying to the FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign? You got asked a series of questions. Would it include? I'm just curious if you thought that would be the weaponization of government.
You know, lying to a court, any court, FISA court or otherwise, is deeply troubling.
That wasn't the question. Would the weaponization of government include lying to a FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign?
I would suppose it could.
Could?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Would it include text messages written by people who were involved in that effort to spy on presidential campaign? Text messages like, don't worry, we'll stop Trump. Would that be the weaponization of government as well?
You know, I think that's inappropriate language because we're supposed to be doing our work, you know, apolitically, without fear or favor. So, you know, I think that's ill-advised.
Sure was. It's so ill-advised. Mr. Mueller kicked those individuals off his team. So ill-advised that Kevin Kleinsmith got prosecuted for lying to the FISA court in order to go spy on a presidential campaign. That seems to me to be the weaponization of government as well. I'm going to thank all of you for being here. Mr. Allen, we really thank you. You're the one who's had to endure this, your testimony to the strength of your faith and your family, I think, is just inspiring. We appreciate your service to our country, service to this committee and to the country for telling your story and being willing to come forward and work with Mr. Levitt. Mr. Horowitz, we appreciate the work you've done over the years in getting this information to us. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.